There was no electricity or gas in the Gordon Essen home, none working anywhere on the island that she knew of, but the shelter was sturdy and well insulated and retained what warmth the fireplace generated. Built before the First World War, the house was brick and wood, and like a handful of others in the neighborhood, had managed to survive the earthquake relatively unscathed. They made their way down the long hall, silently, Montoya looking again at the framed photographs on the walls, as she always did, pictures of Gordon and Essen at different functions, civic award ceremonies. One of them on vacation in Hawaii, maybe during their honeymoon. Another of Gordon hugging his daughter Barbara at her graduation from Gotham State University. Again, Montoya found herself thinking of her own family, glad that they were safe and well. Her parents had owned a bodega in Burnley on the southern part of the North Island. More commonly called Spanish Burnley, it had been an immigrant community since the dawn of time, the Gotham equivalent of New York's South Bronx. Though she knew her old neighborhood was probably full of people who could use a hand, she'd had no opportunities to make it that far north since Black Monday. The journey was now an all but impossible one, through at least 10 differently held territories, and some of those territories, she knew, wouldn't let a cop through alive. She and Bullock entered the war room, the rec room where the commissioner had once run his model trains. Now the trains were gone, the space cleared for chairs, with a city map of Gotham tacked to the far wall. The others were waiting, Essen, Pettit, and Foley, with Gordon standing opposite his wife.
Take a seat.
Pettit looked at Montoya.
How's Kelso holding?
Fine. They could use more ammunition, but the border's secure.
I'll see what I can do.
Situation report as of today, day 90. Tricorner is ours. We've made it a week now without any incursions from the street demons or the lowboys, and it looks like most of our residents seem content with the protection we're providing. Right now, we're still holding with 23 officers fit for duty, plus another 50-odd residents who have expressed their desire to help. Pettit's been working with them for the last month now, and he informed me this morning that he thinks they're ready for action.
Ready and waiting. Just point and shoots, Jim.
Gordon nodded slowly, then smoothed his mustache.
We're ready for the next phase.
Which would be?
Old Gotham. Everything between here and Central. I want it all back.
To secure that much area, they'd have to take out both the demons and the lowboys, combined numbers of over 100 men who didn't feel any need to fight fair, who had long since given up any pretense of civilized behavior. She glanced around the room, at the faces and reactions. Essen had obviously seen this coming and was still sitting calmly. Pettit looked positively delighted. Foley frowned.
I think it's a bad idea, Commissioner.
What would you suggest?
Shoring up our own territory should be the priority. Making sure we can defend what we've got here.
We're not playing a defensive game anymore, Hugh. That's old-style cop think you're using. We're on offense now.
Bill is right. As the GCPD, we were a reactive force for the most part. What we're talking about now is being proactive, plain and simple. The demons and the lowboys, they're just biding their time. Sooner or later, one of them will incorporate the other, and when that happens, you know they'll head south. We've got to hit them first.
But Central's miles away. There's no point in reclaiming it. Any gear that was there has long since been looted. You know that.
It's our HQ. It's where the Blue Boys need to be. The propaganda value of having the GCPD back where they belong could do wonders. Or would you rather have some Class A skell going through your desk drawers and wandering around in our colors? Don't be so gutless, Hugh.
It's not gutless. It's practical. It at least acknowledges our situation.
Meaning what?
Meaning, I think you've got an ulterior motive here, Commissioner. Your daughter lives near Central, doesn't she?
Montoya saw the line of Gordon's jaw tighten for a moment, the muscles flexing.
She does?
So maybe this is less about propaganda and taking what's ours than it is about you wanting to protect what's yours. And if that's the case, you could at least acknowledge it.
Gladly. I want to protect my daughter. I make no bones about it. There's nothing ulterior in that, Hugh. It's called being a father.
Look, there are too many of them. We can't take them all on. We'd lose what's left of our ammunition. We'd lose men.
I have no intention of launching a frontal assault or losing our people.
Well, they're not just going to surrender to us when they see the badges we're wearing.
Yes, they will. If we pick the right moment. No, if we make the right moment.
And that would be what, sir?
Gordon looked at her, and she saw the corner of his mouth turn down slightly.
We're going to incite them to war. And when it's over, and when they've blown their strength and lowered their numbers, that's when we'll move.
That's beautiful, Jim. That's perfect. I couldn't have come up with better myself.
It's pragmatic. That's all, Bill.
Bullock pulled the stick from his mouth.
Am I hearing you right, Commish?
Gordon's look was as serious and solemn as any Montoya had seen on him before. It was the look she'd marked on him at crime scenes, where innocents lay dead at the hands of madmen. He knew exactly what he was saying, she realized. He'd already thought this through, had been thinking on it for a while now. Whether or not she agreed with the decision, she knew it was one the commissioner had reached only through long consideration.
Yes, Harvey. We're going to get them to kill each other off.
You can't be serious.
You have a better way?
We're talking about manipulating people to commit murder, Bill.
You don't get it, Hugh. We're at war. Out there beyond Tri-Corner, it's chaos, plain and simple. We're the only order left in this burg, and if we want the burg to survive, it's up to us to impose it on the rest of the island. And the only way to do that is by being stronger, by being meaner.
Montoya heard Bullock settling in the chair beside her. Essen was still motionless in her seat, listening. Foley had looked back to the commissioner. No one spoke.
Then we start tonight. Dismissed.
She was in the backyard, sitting on the cold concrete steps down from the cracked sliding glass door, eating her lunch, when he found her.
Renee?
Gordon settled next to the detective.
How's the meal?
She held up the can of vegetarian chili for him to see.
Passable, sir. Cooked in the can. Gives it that extra tinny flavor.
Gordon smiled briefly, his eyes surveying his garden. Since the start of the No Man's Land, he'd put considerable effort into the yard, preparing it optimistically for spring. Montoya had been with him when last month they'd gone through the wreckage of a Yards and Yards home improvement store, looking for tools and supplies. She had left, carrying axes, shovels, and pry bars. The commissioner had left with boxes of vegetable seeds and 6 books on gardening. Right now, as far as Montoya could tell, the garden had a long way to go before it would ever yield fruit. She set the can aside, then used the edge of a bandana to clean the spoon before stowing it back in her inside pocket. She felt the silver $50 in her pocket, the one she had taken from Two-Face just weeks before the No Man's Land was declared. For an instant, her mind wandered to him, the man who was, somewhere beneath the scarring and insanity, still Harvey Dent. She didn't understand why he'd given her the coin, and she understood less why she kept it. As currency, it was useless, not even a real $50, but rather a novelty coin, double-headed. One of the sides had been defaced, scraped and burnt, turned into what Two-Face called the bad side. The other held the representation of liberty.
I want you to come with me tonight. I want to cross into the demon's territory, see if we can get the ball rolling.
Me, sir?
Gordon nodded, still looking at his garden, as if expecting it to bloom before his eyes.
Don't you want to take Pettit? Don't you think he'd be better for this than I would?
Bill's excellent in a fight, absolutely. But he's not very subtle, and we need to make certain this doesn't get traced back to us. Wouldn't do to have the demons and lowboys uniting to take us on.
Still.
He looked at her with those blue eyes that were almost gray, and always made her think of her father.
I'm not going to take Sarah. If it goes wrong, that would be the entire command structure gone, and I won't risk that. I can't take Foley for obvious reasons, and Bullock, well, he's never been the quietest soul on the force. We'll leave from the Kelso blockade at midnight.
Yes, sir.
And then she was alone in the garden again. After a second, she took the badge off her jacket, examining it. She polished it against the leg of her jeans, then put it in her jacket pocket. She wouldn't be wearing it tonight. The girl that Oracle had named Cassandra was looking at the map in her hand, trying to determine where exactly she now stood in Gotham City. Most of the street signs were long gone, and block counting, her personal tactic, only worked if she could absolutely concentrate. She supposed it was her own failing, that if she had lived in Gotham long enough, even if she had lived here before the quake, she would know the city better. As it was, she had slipped in just prior to the detonations on Black Monday, sneaking past the blockades and barely making it off the Brown Bridge before it had blown sky high. She had come to Gotham because, honestly, she felt it was the safest place for her. She frowned down at the map one last time, then resolved she must be somewhere on the Upper East Side, and since that was where Oracle wanted her to be, she relaxed. Oracle had instructed her that morning.
Black Mask is up there somewhere. See if you can locate him. Find out what he's up to.
Cassandra continued north, working along the sides of the quake-damaged buildings, waiting for the sun to finish its descent. She could smell a fire burning somewhere, pungent. She lowered into a crouch, moving from shadow to shadow, just as her father had taught her. Cassandra stopped dead, both her hands coming to her ears, cupping them with palms out. She turned her head slowly, trying to locate the source of the scream. Cassandra got a bearing and began to run. The broken ground was uneven and could be tricky, and twice during her first weeks in the NML she had almost twisted her ankles. But that was months ago now, and she had long since adapted, again as her father had taught her, learning to use the ground to her advantage. She was certain that she could now run faster than ever. Cassandra came around the corner of the shattered diner, turning to an alley, leaving the shadows, and then she stopped short. She had expected a victim, a fight, a conflict. What she saw now, she knew instantly as a trap, and it made a sudden heat of shame burn her cheeks. The woman who had been screaming was at the end of the alley, wrapped in layers of rags, torn blankets tied around a jacket, all to keep out the cold. Late 30s, white and mean-looking, and it wasn't just the fact that she was holding a composite bow drawn back and ready to put its arrow in Cassandra's chest that was the alarming thing. The woman's face was a mass of scars, lines visible in the dusk, puffy skin that looked alternately lacerated and burnt. The woman's mouth looked as if it had been cut, blackened scabs that shone with fresh blood at both sides. From behind her, Cassandra heard movement out of the rubble. At least 3 people, and none of them so stupid as to be within striking distance.
Dinner time.
And the scarred woman loosed the arrow. Cassandra went down, letting her left leg take her weight as she spun to see the men behind her. 3 of them, all with faces carved up like the woman's, all dressed in the same fashion. The arrow sliced the air over her head, hitting the chest of the man who had stood behind her. The other 2 men were moving up on her, and she knew, could almost feel, where the woman at the end of the alley was knocking another arrow. Using her left leg, Cassandra sprang up high, going into the kick intuitively, and the heel of her foot connected with the jaw of the nearest man. Still in the jump, she twisted, swinging her right leg up and around to connect with the remaining man's face. She landed facing the alley. The woman with the bow doubled up in pain. Another figure was in the alley now between them, cloaked in a purple that in the shadow turned to black. Cassandra found her balance instantly, returning to ready, arms up. The figure turned, and beyond her on the ground, the woman with the bow was clutching at her hand. Through the back of the woman's palm, Cassandra saw the spike of metal, wet with blood. The cloaked figure absently kicked at the woman, catching her in the stomach, and Cassandra's own gut trembled. She moved her mouth, wanting to make the figure stop, but it was already over. Now the figure was moving forward, and Cassandra suddenly recognized her, remembering the pictures that Oracle had shown her only a week before. The masks, Oracle had called them, trying to stress their obvious importance. And this was one of them, Cassandra remembered. One of the bad ones, according to Oracle. They called her the Huntress. The figure stopped in front of her, cape billowing back, and Cassandra's eyes flicked to the glint of the cross at the woman's throat.
There'll be more of them. They stick close together in packs. Follow me.
Huntress went past, ignoring the men on the ground, the one with the arrow in his chest, already visibly dead. Cassandra followed her out of the alley, across the street. Huntress knew how to run on the broken ground too, she noted, leading the way through rubble and shadow to a building, cracked but still standing. The sun had finally set, and the sky was turning almost the same shade as the Huntress's costume. Sheltered in shadow, Huntress turned to look at her.
Are you injured?
Cassandra shook her head.
Need a moment? Catch your breath?
Cassandra shook her head once more, then opened her mouth. Behind the mask, Huntress's eyes widened slightly.
Did they cut you? Are you all right?
Cassandra put the fingers of her right hand over her mouth. For a moment, Huntress just stared at her.
You're mute?
It was more complicated than that, but Cassandra nodded, knowing that it would be nearly impossible to explain the how and the why. And even if she could explain those two things, she would have to explain the rest, the darkness of it all, and the evil. And she didn't want to tell anyone that. Not ever. What she wanted was to forget it all.
I haven't seen you before. Not in this neighborhood, at least. Are you lost?
Cassandra shook her head, pulling out the map. She pointed at the section of Old Gotham, just below the Diamond District. Huntress misunderstood.
No, you're up here now, see?
With a gloved finger, she indicated the street they were on. Cassandra nodded, quickly replaced the map in her pocket, then turned to face Huntress again. She thought for a moment, then presented both hands, palms up. She looked at Huntress, smiling, then brought her hands together, lacing the fingers.
You're welcome.
Cassandra grinned.
But it looked like you didn't really need my help. You need a place to stay for the night? I know some safe spots. I've been protecting a block just east of here. There's warmth and shelter and food there if you'd like.
The offer was tempting. It would be nice to be warm for a little while, and she was hungry. Hadn't eaten since that morning when Oracle had made her a bowl of instant oatmeal. Cassandra started to nod, and then she balked. Criminal. Stay away from her, Oracle had said. Huntress was looking at her with an almost maternal concern now, and it surprised Cassandra, the sudden softness in the eyes behind the mask. But it didn't matter. It wasn't enough. Oracle was counting on her. Find Black Mask, that was the job. Cassandra had to do the job. And then maybe she could think about being warm and fed. Cassandra shook her head. The softness Cassandra thought she'd seen in the Huntress's eyes vanished like vapor. She was looking again at the ruined street, ready to return to business.
Remember, only one block east of here. That's where you'll find me. Come back if you need anything.
Cassandra nodded.
Take care of yourself, kid.
And then Huntress moved past her out of the shadow and into the newly forming night. Cassandra shut her eyes for an instant to concentrate, to make the extra effort.
Goodbye.
But Huntress was already gone, and Cassandra closed her mouth, knowing that no one at all had heard her. Montoya was afraid the commissioner would say something about her not wearing the badge, but when they met at midnight on the Kelso blockade, Gordon hardly seemed to notice.
Thanks for coming, Renee.
He gave her a grin, then handed over 2 cans of spray paint.
Demons is red, Lowboys is gold. Make sure you know which is which.
Absolutely, sir.
Good. You armed?
I've got my Glock, sir. 2 shots left.
Gordon rummaged through his coat pockets, then handed over another 7 9mm bullets, which he dropped into Montoya's hand.
Don't use them all in one place.
Where did you find these? I thought we'd used up all the 9s.
Pettit. Don't know where he keeps finding them. He presented me with almost 100 rounds of 38 and 9mm before the meeting this morning.
Montoya nodded, not truly listening, as she slipped the magazine back into her gun and chambered her first round. She set the safety, holstered the gun, and turned her attention expectantly back to Gordon.
Where's your shield, Detective?
I thought it would be best if I didn't wear it tonight, sir. It didn't feel right.
Fair enough. Hopefully you'll put it back on come morning.
That's my plan, sir.
All right. Let's go.
It was easier than either of them expected to cross from Tri-Corner into Old Gotham, and they slunk past the Demon's checkpoint on the Westward Bridge without noise or hesitation. They moved north another 2 blocks, shadowing one another from either side of the street, until they reached the outskirts of one of the many settled pockets in the territory. Demon's tags were painted at random intervals, each a stylized red D with a curved devil's tail and horns, usually one every 2 blocks or so, sometimes more. Whenever Montoya spotted one, she would stop, checking Gordon's position, then the safety of the street. Then, she'd produce her can of gold paint. 2 lines first, through the Demon's tag, and then beside it, a quick, bold LB to implicate the Lowboys. The noise of the spray can sounded like a shout in her ears. When they reached O'Neill Avenue, Gordon gestured to her from across the street, urging her out of the shadows. Spray cans concealed in her jacket, Montoya moved forward, and Gordon met her halfway. Side by side, they continued along the street.
Nothing to be afraid of, just two folks out for a stroll.
In the middle of the night, in the middle of no man's land.
They won't notice. Trust me, they've got other things to worry about.
They continued along O'Neill, deeper into the heart of Demon's territory. The tags here were farther apart. Every so often, Montoya heard vague noises in the distance, sometimes movement from inside the buildings. The night was clear, the half-moon bright, and small packets of snow shone white-blue along the ground, mounded against the broken pavement. They fell into the shadows of larger buildings, turning along Brady, heading northeast now. In the gap between two fallen buildings, Montoya saw the outline of the clock tower, still easily a mile or more away. Moonlight shone off the still intact stained glass on the giant clock face, and she felt herself grinning without realizing it.
I can't believe it's still standing.
Yeah, built by Wayne Enterprises. Turns out Wayne buildings were the only ones built earthquake-proof.
Lucky for your daughter.
The commissioner nodded slightly, then stopped.
Damn.
A fraction later, she caught the scent too, and opened fire, the unmistakable odor of burnt paper. At the corner, they peeked around to see the remains of the Gotham City Public Library main branch, a small mob gathered in front. The men and women stood in a large circle at the foot of the steps, warming themselves with a fire on the open ground. As Montoya looked, one of the men added more fuel to the fire.
They're burning books.
A sharp heaviness drove against her heart suddenly, forcing her to look away.
Makes my stomach turn too.
We should stop them.
We can't stop them, not now. Maybe when we're here, when we control this land, maybe then. But right now, it would only make us targets.
Right.
Come on, let's find what we're after and get out of here.
It took another 20 minutes before they reached the border zone of the territories, Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, running north to the south end of Robinson Park out of sight. Tags were becoming plentiful once more, and they had to slow their progress, taking each as it came, methodical in the defacement. Montoya tried not to dwell on the irony, to think of how many teens she had busted while on the beat for doing exactly what she and the commissioner were doing now. At 12th and Shrek, they found a large demon's tag, almost 6 feet high.
Border sign.
We do this one, then head back. That should get them riled.
The relief surprised her, and Montoya nodded quickly, feeling the nozzle on the spray can digging into her index finger. She had just finished painting the B in the lowboy's tag when she heard the voice.
You two sure as hell don't look like lowboys.
Montoya turned, saw that Gordon had already done the same, but both held off on going for their weapons. There was no point. There were 5 of them, all men, the eldest no more than 30 if that, though in the light it was hard to tell. Their jackets were salvaged denim, painted with horns and tails. 2 had machetes, another an axe. The remaining 2 had shotguns. All of them had shaved their heads.
Doesn't matter. The penalty for trashing the demons is death.
The one with the axe turned his head slightly.
All right, boys, kill the geezer. Try to keep her alive. She might be fine in the light.
Gordon hadn't moved. In her periphery, Montoya could see his hand waiting at his hip, knew what he was waiting for. If the shotguns were loaded, they didn't stand a chance of drawing in time. They'd be dead before their weapons cleared their holsters. But now, it was just a chance they were going to have to take. She swung her hand back, knocking the edge of her coat away to clear her holster, just as she'd done 1,000 times before in drills and practice, and she felt the world become slow with the sudden feed of adrenaline. And as always, the strange clarity came with it. Gordon was doing the same, and the man with the shotgun pointed at her. His mouth was shaped like a bow, a soft shape for a killer. All 5 gang members were dead, and she and the commissioner were still standing. A man was coming out of the shadows beyond the bodies, slinging an M16 back over his shoulder, and Montoya moved her weapon to track him.
Pettit.
Captain Billy Pettit grinned, and his mustache and the light made him look almost feral to Montoya's eyes.
Hope you don't mind, Commissioner. I figured it was time to take a little initiative.
You've been following us all night?
Pettit's grin grew, and he cast a quick glance at Montoya.
Well, I just couldn't sleep, Jim, knowing that you and Renee were out here without anyone to cover your backs. Well, I was just tossing and turning, thinking that maybe spray paint alone just wouldn't be enough to start our little war.
No.
Pettit nodded, then bent to the nearest body. He took it by the feet and dragged it toward the retagged wall.
Little help here, Renee?
Montoya holstered her weapon, and the three of them moved the bodies beneath the lowboy tag.
Now that's how to incite a war. Bodies. Of course, it's all for nothing if their comrades in arms, so to speak, don't see what those degenerate lowboys have done. Shouldn't be a problem, though. Between the gunfire and a little added incentive.
Like what?
Demons!
Let's move.
Gordon reached out to touch Montoya, and she turned to follow him, suddenly sprinting down the block into lowboy territory. Pettit was right behind her.
They killed them! Those baskets!
In another nest of shadow, they stopped. Montoya crouched between Pettit and Gordon.
Yeah, good start. Means nothing if the lowboys don't join them, though.
This way.
You better run, lowboys! We're gonna dice and slice you up!
Montoya concentrated on staying upright on the terrain. Stealth was gone. Now it was the hare leading the hounds, hopefully straight into another pack of dogs. She wasn't even sure where they were anymore as she came around another corner. Gordon and Pettit were behind her now, and she saw the fires burning farther down the street, the figures around them, and the lowboy tag on the brick across from her. She stopped and felt Pettit and Gordon come up beside her.
Lowboys.
She scanned the ground. A shattered piece of brick caught her eye, and she grabbed it, pulling her arm back. The brick flew, bouncing off the hood of a rusted and stripped car, and the group of lowboys turned.
What was that? Over there!
The lowboys turned to them and began menacing their way along the street. Pettit pulled Montoya back into the shadows.
Come on.
Let's head up.
Gordon indicated the fire escape in the alley behind them. The ladder had been lowered already, and the commissioner was reaching toward it.
Out of their way.
Montoya followed him up, Pettit on her heels. She held her breath as they crossed the grating on the third floor, feeling the rust peel and stick to her hands as she used the railing. Of the buildings that were still standing, few of them engendered her trust, but the thought of falling to the street and landing between the demons and the lowboys kept her moving. Gordon had made it to the roof and extended a hand to her, which Montoya ignored, pulling herself over the edge and onto the sunken tar paper surface. Pettit appeared only a couple of seconds later. All of them crouched again, catching their breath, peering over the edge.
Going out like that, son! You wanna step
Montoya thought the numbers of the two groups looked roughly even, maybe 6 or 7 to a side. All were brandishing weapons. And then one of the demons swung a baseball bat, and Montoya didn't want to watch anymore. She turned away from the edge, putting her back to the short retaining wall. Her stomach was in knots, and her hands were shaking slightly, and she wanted something to drink to drive the dryness from her mouth. She knew that it wasn't just adrenaline that was making her feel sick. Pettit watched eagerly.
Well, congratulations, people. We've just started a war.
Hey.
Hey.
His bride was waiting for him when Gordon got home, and as always, it made him smile and feel lighter, if only for a moment. Sarah waited until he was through the door, past where DeFilippis and Weir stood guarding the house, and then followed him down the hall to their bedroom. He took off his coat and tossed it over the back of the chair. Gordon stooped to pick up the can of spray paint that had fallen from his pocket. He sat on the edge of the bed and took off his shoes, then removed the holster from his belt, setting it on the table to the side. Then he stood up and took his wife in his arms.
Bad, huh?
Gordon fought for a moment for the words, then simply nodded, felt her lips brushing his cheek, then finding his mouth. He took the kiss like it was water, like he was dying of thirst. For a while, He thought maybe he could never get enough. Later, staring at the ceiling, feeling Sarah's heart beating against his chest, safe in their bed, he almost thought it would be okay. She moved, drawing a hand along his chest, nuzzling his neck for a second.
Tell me.
We're gonna have to pay. What we did. I wish I could be sure, Sarah. I wish I could be sure I was doing the right thing.
When have any of us ever had that luxury? When the married cop and the single detective began their affair? Who was sure then?
I'm sure now.
Hindsight is 20/20, Jim.
Pettit is sure.
Pettit is narrow. He knows what he knows, and that's all he needs. Black and white makes him happy.
Maybe a black and white view of the world is what we need now.
Maybe.
Gordon tightened his grip slightly on Sarah, feeling her settle against him. Her leg was long and warm, and for a moment he thought he could concentrate just on that.
You can't be sure, Jim. It's not who you are.
I know, but I have to wonder, how far will it go? How far will we have to go?
How far are you prepared to take it?
I don't know.
Yes, you do. How far will a father go to protect his daughter?
All the way.
Right.
He turned in the bed, touching her face with his hand, then his lips.
I'll go all the way.
Again?
Huh. I'm old, remember? Twice in a night is too much for this old warhorse.
Let's test that theory.
Sarah moved to cover his body more fully with her own. He watched her face cloud for a moment again.
Jim, we do what we have to in order to survive. That's the rule of nature. Until we have survival, we can't have civilization.
If this is foreplay, it's not working.
You'll get foreplay in a second. For now, listen to me.
She lowered her head, her nose touching his, her eyes locked on his own.
We're going to make it, hon. We'll make it.
I believe you.
You should. I'm a cop. I'm honest and trustworthy, and my word is my bond.
Less word, please, more bond.
I thought you were too old.
I'm feeling younger every second.
Is that what you're feeling?
That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
In that case, Commissioner, I think further investigation is in order.
Carry on, Lieutenant.
Love you, cop boy.
Love you too, Seamus.
Oracle, personal. Entry number 304. No Man's Land Day 101. 10:20 Zulu. Dear Dad, no one knows which side started it. Woke up 3 days ago, suddenly the war was on. Demons versus low boys. My eyes tell me it's bloody. They tell me it's personal. That on the ground, the civilians know enough to stay out of the way, behind their closed doors and hidden in their shelters. On the street, the gangs roam, armed and angry, looking for another fight. The body count is unknown. I expect it's pretty high. Without medical facilities and care, casualties turn to fatalities as a matter of course. The low boys on the street below have taken to burning their dead, pretending it's the bodies of their mortal enemies, the hated demons. Nobody watching buys it. Rumor is that the demons are doing the exact same thing, claiming their own dead as that of the low boys. What I'm finding fascinating, and you'll forgive the academic in me rearing its head here, is the way the propaganda war has manifested. I doubt anyone on either side could explain their behavior as such, much less define what the word itself means. But they have fallen into the techniques quickly, mastering them at the most basic level. For hours yesterday, a group of lowboys went up and down the street below. The demons, we are told, are cannibals, barbarians, monsters, and for that reason, we need the lowboys. They're here to protect us, after all. And I suppose in a fashion they do believe that. All the same, it's failed them. Doors stay shut, windows stay boarded. Only lowboys have been seen on the streets for the last few days. No man's land we may be, but we're still Gotham, and most of us just don't want to get involved. Cassandra reported this morning that you and your crew are on the move. She drew me a picture of a badge, and then a building. I'm assuming that means you're headed for Central. If that's true, maybe I'll see you soon. I hope so. I miss you and Sarah. Cassandra also spent 15 minutes or so scribbling on the scraps of paper, drawing tags and then crossing them out, redrawing different tags. Then she was pointing at the picture of the badge. It took me a while before the neuron fired. If I'm understanding what she's trying to tell me, Dad, I really don't know what to say. I really don't know how to respond. Hopefully, I'll have a chance to get the answer from you in person. The tally on the bat tags has grown, now 11 of them scattered throughout the city. No one has seen the Batman, though, so I really don't know what to make of the tags at this point. It occurred to me last night as I was falling asleep that it's most likely not him at all, but rather a different gang trying to capitalize on the strength of the symbol, the currency of myth. I still haven't heard from him. Is it arrogant of me to think he'd call? That he'd let me know he was here? I don't think it is, really. In the past few years, I've helped him more times than either of us could recall. I know that. I've been a major source of information for him in the past. I have, quite honestly, been part of the team. He'd call me, wouldn't he? I was Batgirl, after all. He'd call, he'd let me know he was here. But he hasn't. And I don't know what that means. I honestly don't know what to make of it. Maybe he really did leave us here alone. Leave Gotham to its misery. No, see, I don't buy that. So maybe he's hurt. Or even dead. But I don't buy that either. Some nights, I look out my window and I think there is a weight hanging over us all. We're all waiting for something to happen. For something to change this status quo of 100-odd days. Then I realize I'm waiting for him. He must be here. He must.
Garrett was not, in his own opinion, a bad person. A criminal, certainly. He'd be the first to admit that. But a bad person? Nah. He was just a guy using what talents he had to make ends meet. That's all it was. Before NML, he'd been a thug, a petty bruiser, working for the Lindsay crew in the Bowery. Steady work had kept him in beer money, and he could spend his days practicing his pool game and rebuilding his Camaro. A 67, blood red, the kind of car that got him plenty of dates. At nights, he'd go where his old boss Lindsay sent him. Sometimes Garrett would carry a gun, but more often than not, a crowbar or baseball bat would do the trick nicely. Garrett never hit more or harder than he needed to, and he never enjoyed it. He was not, and he was always quick to point this out, one of those Arkham nuts that got off on inflicting damage. But that was before. Then 8.4 or 7.8 or however much of Richter's scale had come to visit Gotham, and that was the end of Lindsay's crew, buried under the remnants of the Otis Auto Supply warehouse, where they had all hung out. When the National Guard finally found them, Garrett was the only one still conscious. Lindsay himself had been alive, but died 3 days later in a mobile hospital from his injuries. For a while after that, especially when the word came down that the old US of A was pulling Gotham's plug, Garrett had seriously considered bugging out, maybe even going straight. He had a sister in Metropolis who worked at a diner, and she told him the joint was looking for a short order cook, and hell, Garrett could have done that. He had actually been packing what was left of his stuff when Fowler came to visit. Fowler, who was so skinny it seemed like the guy was nothing but walking bones. Fowler, who always seemed to know what sort of petty crime needed to be done.
Hey, Garrett, you're not leaving, are you?
Maybe. What's up?
The Penguin would like to offer you a job.
It was easier than going straight, that was for sure. Working for Penguin was different from working for Lindsay in that Penguin was smart. Really smart. Had every angle covered, had plans inside of plans. Garrett dug that, and had great respect for Penguin. They were a lot alike, Garrett thought. Not in the brains department or anything like that, but because they each knew what they did best and didn't pretend. Garrett, over 6'2" and mostly muscle, knew what his assets were. Same could be said of Penguin, with his malformed and squat little body. Penguin needed Garrett's muscle for busting heads, and for other stuff too.
My friend, look at this city and tell me what you see.
Rubble.
Garrett prided himself on his honesty. Garrett came to recognize that sound as Penguin chuckling.
Opportunity, my friend. Opportunity. For when the federal government, in its glorious short-sightedness, calls an end to Gotham City as we know it, we will be the first pioneers of a brave new world. Gotham shall be our oyster.
Never much cared for oysters, Mr. Cobblepot.
Don't interrupt, my lad.
Garrett shut his mouth. He was good at following orders.
The business opportunities for the enterprising entrepreneur in this forsaken urban sprawl will be lucrative. A smart man, could find himself rich beyond the dreams of avarice. Richer than a Bruce Wayne. Richer even, dare I say it, than a Lex Luthor.
Rich is good.
Not the sharpest stick in the bundle, are you, Garrett?
No, sir, Mr. Cobblepot.
But you follow orders, I'm told, and are strong, yes?
Yes, sir, Mr. Cobblepot.
And manners are always a plus. Very well, Garrett. Stick with Fowler. He'll tell you what we'll need.
Tonight, what Penguin needed was someone to prove if the bridges and river were mined. Fowler's plan, and once he had explained it to Garrett, it had made a kind of sense, had been to find people in the no man's land, people all alone that no one would miss. Then Garrett and Fowler would take these people, one at a time of course, and put them on the bridges or whatnot, or throw them into the water.
That way, we'll know if the route is mined, and we'll also have disarmed one of the mines in the process.
Disarmed?
Well, detonated, more like, but the principle is the same.
I don't know. Seems kinda mean.
You think it's mean?
Kinda, yeah.
Would you rather it be you?
No.
So then, if it isn't you, how is that mean?
Give me a sec.
Garrett, you're a stump, you know that? Now come on, let's go find Murphy, then we can get to work.
Garrett, Fowler, and Murphy waited in cover by the Robert Kane Memorial Bridge, watching the shadows growing longer as the night fell.
There's one. That guy there. Think he'll do?
Garrett looked where Murphy was indicating, even though he knew damn well Murphy wasn't talking to him, but to Fowler. Murphy was just another of Penguin's crew, and had worked with Fowler before the NML. Murphy had made it plain that he thought Garrett was a stump too, and always ignored him when they were out on business for Penguin. Murphy was pointing at a man maybe 200 yards away, ambling along the embankment of the Gotham River. The fading light made it hard to pick him out, but one thing was clear to Garrett right away, and that was that the man was old. Garrett didn't like old people. They smelled.
He'll do. Now come on.
About 50 yards away, Garrett realized that the man was singing. Murphy stopped about 10 feet away from the man, blocking his retreat. Fowler moved to block the front, which left Garrett to take the middle. This close, he could see that the old man had a beard, long and gray like Santa Claus's, only this guy was thin and wearing a real hat with like a broad brim instead of a stocking thing with a puffball on it. For a moment, Garrett wondered what he'd do for Christmas.
Where you headed, old fella?
Nowhere.
Nah, you don't want to do that. Nowhere. That's a waste of time. Especially when you could be going somewhere instead. Want to do that? Do something useful with us?
No.
Okay, well, how about you say yes, and we don't kill you right here?
Fowler pulled out his knife, which was the signal for Garrett and Murphy to pull out their knives as well.
Got his attention there, I think.
Oh, yeah. So, this is the deal, old man. We're going up on the bridge, and you're gonna cross it. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking that bridge is broken, and this is true. So you're gonna go off the bridge and into the water.
Fowler nodded to Garrett, and Garrett moved forward and put a hand on the old man's shoulder and started moving him. The old guy was taller than Garrett thought at first, but still stooped, and he moved without resisting. Fowler led the way onto the bridge. Garrett followed with the old man. Murphy took up the rear. Together, they walked up the embankment onto the cracked asphalt of the bridge, heading toward the broken segment. The Gotham River flowed by slowly over 100 feet below. They reached the edge.
You're getting a chance to leave Gotham, old man. Can you swim?
Not in there. Mine's in there.
Hey, not so dumb after all.
That's right. The river's supposed to have mines in it. And you're gonna find out if that's true or not. If there's no mines, figure you swim to safety, you escape. If there is mines, then you get blown to hell, and there'll be one less mine for the next guy we toss in. So this is what we call a win-win situation, see?
Not for me.
Well, no. It's all a matter of perspective then, isn't it?
The old man nodded slowly, as if accepting what Fowler had said, and then, with a speed that surprised Garrett, spun and brought his right hand up, breaking first Garrett's grip, and then his nose. Garrett reached for the man as he tried to move away. The beard came off in his hand, and Garrett looked at the face of the man, and for almost a second, couldn't understand what he was seeing. Then he realized the beard was a fake, and that the man, while old, wasn't more than 60, and that the man's eyes were clear and smart, and not crazy at all. Then, it all happened at once. A shadow had taken Murphy's knife, and Murphy was on the ground with his eyes closed. Fowler had grabbed the man, but when the shadow moved forward, he let go of him and tried to run. The old man, off balance, fell back against Garrett. Garrett closed his grip on instinct, putting his knife to the man's throat. The shadow raised an arm quickly, throwing something small and black. Then Fowler fell flat, and the shadow was coming forward, and it had horns, and wings, and claws, and was as big as Garrett himself, and moving like it didn't need to touch the ground at all.
The bat! Let him go!
The words seemed to rattle around the inside of Garrett's chest. When he answered, he was shocked by what he said.
Like hell!
The Batman moved forward again, and Garrett pressed the blade against the old man's throat.
I'll kill him! I don't want to, but I'll do it! You let me pass!
Let him go.
Garrett thought, tried to do it quickly, trying to find a way out. He thought it was a good plan. He thought it would give him time. He was wrong. He shoved the old man toward the ledge and off the side of the bridge. The Batman moved, his cape swirling up into the man's path, and the old man caught it and used it to swing around behind the Batman, staying safely on the bridge. Garrett lunged with the knife, and the Batman moved out of the way effortlessly. Garrett hit the ground flat, his head aching, the knife now gone. He rolled quickly onto his back, trying to get up once more, and the Batman loomed over him. Garrett saw the boot coming down. Then he saw darkness. It wasn't truly a cave at all, but rather an abandoned Gotham Power and Electric Company substation in Newtown. But through the false wall at the south side, there was a small flight of stairs, and at the bottom of that, another door, and then beyond, the place Bruce Wayne was currently resting his head. He didn't like thinking of it as a bat cave, but then he never cared much for calling the true cave that either. As it was, though, the true cave was buried under the ruins of Wayne Manor, a house that had stood for over 200 years, only to be felled in an instant by nature's whimsy. This Batcave was only one of several throughout Gotham, a network of bolt holes and command posts he had constructed after his back had been broken a few years ago by the man who called himself Bane. Bane had defeated Batman, had nearly killed him, and Bane had done it all by wearing Batman down, chipping away at him until there was nothing left with which the Batman could fight. Never again, Batman had vowed. Never that unprepared again. Thus, the many satellite caves. The Batman stepped back, throwing the switch for the gasoline generator, then activating the lights. The space was cramped, used for both work and rest. Medical supplies and other equipment were neatly stacked along one far wall. A work table ran the length of another, the metal surface covered with bits and pieces of equipment, extra spools of monofilament, a scattering of pocket explosives, miniature tear gas, and smoke grenades. A squat radio with handset rested near the edge, switched off. The paraphernalia of the Batman. He turned, watching as Alfred Pennyworth entered, and then moved past him. Somewhere in his 60s, tall, thin, and eminently proper, Alfred took in the small room archly, the coat he'd been wearing in disguise folded properly over his left arm, the false beard and broad-brimmed hat in one hand.
Very nice, Master Bruce. You've done wonders with the place.
Thank you, Alfred. As Bruce Wayne pulled back the cowl, he felt in that instant of exposure the weight that always returned to his heart. He watched as the older man set the coat and hat on the nearest cot, then turned back to look at him. Bruce knew that look. The combat medic look that Alfred had turned on him every night when Batman returned to the True Cave. More than a survey of damage, it was a look that spoke volumes. It was, more often than not, a paternal look, and there were times when Bruce savored it. There were also times when he hated it from his core. Alfred Pennyworth had been one of Thomas and Martha Wayne's dearest friends. When Bruce was orphaned, it was Alfred who took care of him, and since that time, Alfred had always been there. Alfred had been Bruce's tutor and confidant, and certainly the greatest gentleman's gentleman one could ever have asked for. He was an able medic, a gifted actor, a learned scholar of life, but he was not, and could never be, Bruce Wayne's father, and both men knew that.
I had begun to fear, Master Bruce, that the homing transmitter was defective.
No, I was. Bruce moved to the table and began unfastening the utility belt around his waist, laying it out on the surface, checking its compartments.
I beg your pardon, sir?
I was, Alfred. I have to relearn how to move in Gotham. Broken cornices, rubble, collapsed rooftops. It's forcing me to slow down. I hope it's not Gotham trying to tell me something.
Given the length of your absence, sir, I had thought you would have worked past such thoughts already.
I thought I had too.
You have only been back a scant few weeks, and tonight was your first foray in your work clothes, shall we say? It could have gone much worse.
You nearly died.
But I did not. As always, you demand too much of yourself.
3 months I wasted, searching my own soul instead of fighting for Gotham's.
After every battle, a time is required to recover. After a defeat, sir, the recovery is inevitably longer. I know you well enough to say with certainty that you never waste time.
Bruce smiled, almost without meaning to.
The night wasn't a total failure.
No, indeed.
Alfred turned to the workbench and used a handkerchief from his pocket to dust it quickly before leaning against it.
We have learned that I am a brilliant actor who can masquerade effectively as a senile old coot.
We knew that already.
I beg your pardon, sir?
We know that Penguin is interested in cleaning the waterways. That means that whatever pipeline he has to the outside world, assuming he does have one, isn't by water. That means he must have access to a tunnel.
A plausible conclusion, Master Bruce.
I was away too long. The rules have changed. That man, the one who held the knife to you on the bridge, he should have run. They've forgotten me, Alfred.
No, sir. It is simply that there are now things in Gotham which scare them more than the Batman.
Bruce considered the words for several seconds, then began fastening the belt in place once more.
Sir, do you intend to go out again?
Night's young. A lot to do.
Shall I wait for your return here?
No. You said Leslie is still in the city?
Indeed she is, sir. Dr. Tompkins has maintained a small neutral zone in the northeast of the city, where she tends the sick and injured as best she can. It is widely referred to as the MASH sector.
Bruce nodded slightly. Dr. Leslie Tompkins, like Alfred, had been a friend of his parents. She was a passionate humanitarian and physician, and Bruce wasn't surprised at all to have learned that Leslie had remained behind in the no man's land, attempting to provide medical services to any and all who could reach her.
She's a remarkable woman.
I would be a fool to disagree, sir.
Head there. I'll contact you when I can.
Bruce turned to him.
I'm sorry I was slow tonight, Alfred.
I must say it was nice seeing you back in action. You looked, dare I say, quite good. Did it feel good?
No, Alfred?
Bruce pulled the cowl back into place, felt the comfort of the mask tied around his face.
It felt great.
It did feel great, and that was a comfort as the Batman moved back into the night, to those still stable rooftops that gave him a view of the city spreading out around him. His city. Looking over the wrecked terrain, Batman, for a moment, felt sentimental and even foolish. He turned north and deployed his jump line, swinging across the collapsed ruin of what had been a mosque, moving quickly, feeling the comfort that came from familiar motion. When the rumors had begun that the federal government was planning to abandon Gotham, Bruce Wayne had gone to Washington to plead his city's case. It had been a horrible experience for him, one where he had felt exceptionally off balance, and certainly out of his element. To the public eye, Bruce Wayne was a joke, a billionaire layabout more concerned with shaving strokes off his notoriously bad golf game and dating as many beautiful women as quickly as possible than dabbling in issues of politics. For the most part, it was an image that had served Bruce well. It kept his true identity well hidden from the world. In Washington, though, it had worked too well, and Bruce Wayne's heartfelt pleas were dismissed out of hand. He had been utterly and completely helpless, a feeling he had known only once before in his life. It was the feeling that led him onto the streets of Gotham every night for 10 years. It was the feeling that had ultimately created the Batman. He stopped, crouching carefully on the edge of a slumped roof overlooking what had been Park Row. When he was a boy, Park Row had been one of the nicest parts of town, a collection of high-priced townhouses and elegant shops, restaurants, and theaters. Park Row was where Thomas and Martha Wayne took their little son to the movies, where they'd promised to take him for ice cream after the show. Even before the cataclysm, though, Park Row had declined to become what was universally referred to throughout Gotham as Crime Alley. The shops had closed, the townhouses had been replaced by blocks upon blocks of substandard housing. Its alleys and streets, once clean and alive with laughter, had turned dark and foreboding. He dropped gracefully onto the rubble below. Clinging to the shadows, he made his way up the block and then left. He knew the way perfectly, having traveled it literally 1,000 times before, and when he reached the mouth of the alley, he stopped. It had been here that it all started. It had been here that Thomas and Martha Wayne had been murdered. Here that Bruce felt for the first time the utter capriciousness of life. Looking now at where his parents had lain, bleeding to death so many years ago, the Batman felt that helplessness again. 3 months before, Congress had made him feel 8 years old once more, had again delivered the lesson that life could not be controlled, and that even Bruce Wayne's billions, even the Batman's brilliance, could be brushed aside by apathy and self-interest. If Bane had broken his back once more, it would have hurt less. It seemed not just a setback, but a resounding defeat, indeed a rout. It had crushed his spirit, and thus injured Bruce Wayne and the Batman had both retreated. While Alfred remained behind in Gotham, using his considerable skills to gather intelligence for the day when the Batman would return, Bruce fled the country, throwing himself with seeming abandon into the role of playboy and dilettante. In fact, he had been building an alibi that would allow Bruce to vanish for the months, if not years, it would take for the Batman to restore Gotham. In Monaco, Bruce had gambled with petty monarchs and corpulent executives. In Rio, he had danced with supermodels and partied with rock stars. In Hong Kong, he had acquired 2 new companies and bought another Learjet. And all the while he had planned, trying to see what he had done wrong, trying to discover what he could do to make it right again. The petty monarchs and executives, they could help bring political pressure on the President of the United States. One of the rock star's personal trainers was an accomplished capoeira mestre. The 2 companies Bruce acquired each had proprietary construction technology that would aid in eventual rebuilding of Gotham. And he had contacted Lucius Fox, the man he had handpicked to be Wayne Enterprises' CEO, and he had told him that all of the Wayne Empire's formidable resources were to be brought to bear for one purpose: the redemption of Gotham.
The public. It'll all come down to the public. That's where we need to start, Lucius.
How?
I don't know. Buy ads. Television, newspaper, radio, hire lobbyists, anything. But we have to get the public on Gotham's side.
It'll take time, Bruce. And a lot of money. 100 million at least. Just to do what you're talking about.
It's my home, Lucius. I'll be right there. I have to go, Lucius. Kitty needs help with her suntan lotion. It's my home.
It had taken, in the Batman's opinion, much too long to get his act together, to put his plan into motion. Too long since he had set foot on his home ground. Now he had been in Gotham for just over a week, watching and waiting, walking the different neighborhoods, learning the new dynamic of the no man's land. The tagging intrigued him. The bat tag he had seen in particular had raised his eyebrow. He had resisted the urge to jump pell-mell into the fray, instead making contact with Alfred, learning what the gentleman's gentleman had to tell. Finally, the Batman felt ready to face the helplessness head-on. The sound drew Batman's attention back to the present, away from the alley. The sound seemed alien, and he realized that since returning to Gotham, he had seen no dogs at all, nowhere on the streets. Batman moved toward the sound, taking to the rooftops again. The noise was deceptive in the stillness of the city, at first seeming merely around the next corner, but Batman had gone 6 blocks before finally homing in on the source. From the edge of a rooftop, he looked down. It was an adult Airedale, standing in the middle of the street, its tail stiff and its head lowered as it guarded its master, a young boy. The two were surrounded by a group of men, all in salvaged and torn winter clothes, all holding makeshift weapons of one kind or another. Across the street from where he had perched, Batman could make out a spray-painted tag on one of the opposite buildings, the crossed spears of the Koza.
Looks like dinner.
One of the men below held a baseball bat, its end wrapped in barbed wire. The boy began backing away, then halted as he realized that he and his pet had been surrounded.
Leave my dog alone!
Weren't talking about no dog.
Normally, Batman would have waited a second or two longer, timing his entrance to best effect, just before any violence could begin. But what he was seeing now made him angry, and he'd had enough. He launched himself off the rooftop, gathering the edges of his cape in each hand, letting the air fill the ballistic fabric. The move served 2 purposes. First, it slowed his descent enough to keep him from any injury. Second, it threw his silhouette over the gathered Koza and put the fear of God into them.
Look out! What the hell is that?
Then he was down, driving his feet into the back of the nearest Koza as he landed, knocking the man flat to the ground and driving the breath from him. Without stopping, Batman continued forward, breaking into the center of the circle, his right hand dipping around beneath his cape and appearing again, holding 3 batarangs. He turned and flung all 3 with his right, ducking as the Koza with the barbed wire bat took a swing at his head. The batarangs hit their marks, breaking fingers and disarming the men. Without bothering to look, Batman snapped off a sidekick that caught the one with the bat in the stomach and knocked him to the ground. One of the Koza was already running, and of the 3 Batman had hit with the batarangs, 2 of them were turning to flee as well. The one with the bat was now on his back, disarmed. Of the 4 remaining, 1 was going for the boy with a machete. The other 3 were directing their attention at Batman, all wielding blunt objects, 2 pipes and another bat, this one aluminum. There was no choice to make, and Batman sprang forward to protect the boy. He felt some of the blows swing past him, then the explosion of pain as one of them connected with his torso. He was certain he'd cracked his ribs again, but it didn't matter. He was still up, and the machete was coming down, and the Batman got his forearm in the way of the blade. And the metal bashed into the Kevlar and titanium weave reinforcement of his glove. The nerves in his arm shouted, and again the Batman ignored the message, driving the heel of his right palm into the Koza's chin. He turned back to see 2 of the remaining gang members lunging forward.
Get off me, you freaking mutt!
The Airedale had bit into the back of the other's leg, bringing him to the ground. Batman waited till the remaining Koza committed to their attacks. Then, with their balance changing, Batman moved. Both went down, each temporarily stunned. Batman turned to see that the one with the barbed wire bat had gotten his weapon to hand once more, had struck the dog on its hindquarters.
Leave my dog alone, you bastard!
The boy was already on the man, beating at his head and shoulders. Batman reached quickly, pulling the boy back, and then with his free hand delivered a final savage punch to the Koza's face. Batman let the boy go and crouched quickly beside the wounded dog. The barbed wire around the bat had torn at the dog's skin, and blood was flowing, but Batman could tell quickly that the blow had broken no bones, and that the wound looked far more serious than it was. From his utility belt, he took a bandage and pressed it against the wound.
Good girl. That's a good girl.
Petting the dog as he did so.
What's your name?
Bat.
The Batman nodded and scooped the dog up, cradling the Airedale against his chest.
Matt, are you alone here?
My parents died. in the quake. Is Sophie going to be all right?
Sophie will be fine. Where are you living?
I don't have anywhere I can. Anywhere that's safe.
Batman looked at the boy, thinking, and then realized that the look was easily mistaken for an imposing one, and so looked away down the street instead.
Follow me.
He began walking north along the street, still carrying the dog. Matt scurried over the broken pavement, catching up.
Where are we going?
Sophie and you need a safe place to stay. I have a friend who is a doctor. You can stay with her.
Together, with Batman still carrying the dog, they made their way north to Leslie Tompkins' MASH sector.
Are you really him?
Him?
Batman.
Yes.
Cool.